So I am absolutely over the moon and delighted that Edwina has agreed to come and talk to us today. And before I hand the mic over to her, I'm just going to introduce her. I know that you all know her, but I'm just going to give a few words of introduction, just a little bit of background. So Edwina Currie was born in Liverpool to Orthodox parents, and she grew up attending the famous Liverpool Institute High School for Girls. Let me just let somebody in here. Interestingly, the Beatles were next door at the boys' school. Edwina spent a lot of time at the Cavern Club. She was clever enough to win a scholarship to Oxford University. She took a master's degree at the London School of Economics and married to become Edwina Currie. Her career in local politics began in 1975, and in 1983, she was elected Conservative MP to the mining constituency of Derbyshire South. She was re-elected twice more, not once more, but twice more, before losing her seat in 1997 when Tony Blair swept the board. Since then, Edwina has been very busy. She's written 11 books, including best-selling novels. She's won Celebrity Mastermind twice and survived both the Australian jungle in I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and the dance floor for Strictly Come Dancing. Now age 75, unbelievably, Edwina, she continues to grow old disgracefully. They're her words, not mine. And in the 5 minutes I have spoken to Edwina, I think there's no adventure that she will say no to. She's full of life and exuberance. And I'm absolutely delighted, Edwina, that you've come on today. So thank you so much. Very, very huge warm welcome. And I don't think an hour is going to be long enough, but we'll take whatever you can give us. So thank you. And please, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, Ros. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm speaking to you from the Peak District, where for once the weather is actually quite nice and it's sunny and a little bit breezy. It's a lovely day. It's a lovely day. What you can see behind me is my funny little house here. It's 400 years old, this house. It's a cottage on what used to be the main Roman road going from Buxton, which was had Roman beginnings, right through to Manchester and Chester. And on a dark night, you can still hear the Roman soldiers tramping out there and saying it was better in Galicia. There are ghosts all the way around here. So we thought what we'd do is I'd just start us off by telling you a bit about my political background and life, which Ros has actually fairly well covered. But then what we want is lots of comments, questions, light-hearted, more serious. Let's see how we get on. I've often thought that in many ways my political life started when I was about 6 on Seder night, when it was my turn to do the 4 questions, Manish Tana, Halal Hazer, and so on. Why is this night different from all other nights? And my grandfather, who came from Poland, from Jedwabne, over in northeastern Poland, was the head of the table. And he was a proper Zaidi. And he leaned across the table and he said to me, Edwina, we are here tonight because we were slaves in Egypt. And Almighty God brought us out, parted the Red Sea, and drowned all Pharaoh's soldiers. And I remember thinking, gosh, it must have happened when he was a little boy. Can't have been that long ago if he talked about it with such certainty. But also the question in my mind was, how did that happen? What did Pharaoh think about all this? And how did it work? And from there onwards, I think I was peppering my family with questions. By the time I got to be a teenager, and I was at school, which was quite a distinguished school. It was a state grammar school, but even so, it was quite something to be there. But I managed to get permission to go and have lunch, not in the school dining room, which was horrible and wasn't kosher, but to have lunch with my dad, who had a tailor's shop. He was a tailor's cutter down in town. He used to make lovely suits and uniforms and Abercrombie coats for the Merchant Navy, for the old sea captains, many of whom have been injured in the war, so they didn't fit into standard sizes. And the deal was that I could go down into town and have lunch with him. But there were days, of course, when Dad thought I was at school doing extra maths, and school thought I was at Dad's having a sandwich, and I was at the Cavern. Quite a lot of days like that, and great fun it was. Perfectly innocent. I mean, it felt very naughty at the time, but it was perfectly innocent. You take a black polo neck sweater and pull it on over your school uniform and then go and bop away. And it was a pretty smelly, disgusting place underneath the vegetable market in the centre of town. You come back to school, you run back up the hill to school to be ready for double chemistry in the afternoon. And you hide your sweater, put your blazer back on, and everyone will go, oh gosh, we know where you've been. Smell it in your hair. Who was on? Who was playing? You know, all that kind of stuff. And by then I was interested. This is the way that a father communicates with a daughter. I would actually go and spend time with my dad, and he would be reading the News Chronicle, and he would throw it on the table in front of us as we're eating our sandwiches and say, look at those headlines, look what they're up to now. He was a kind of plague on both your houses character. He was trying to run a business when at that time there were lots of trade unions making life very difficult, and Liverpool was going downhill quite fast. And so his way of communicating with me was to talk and argue and debate and so on. And I do remember in, I think it was 1961, when I would have been about 14, Harold Macmillan, the Prime Minister, came to speak in Liverpool and spoke in the Philharmonic Hall about the importance of us joining the European Economic Community. It was, at that point, it was 4 years after it had been created in 1957 when the Treaty of Rome was signed. And school decided they were going to have a debate about this. And I was approached by one of the teachers, I was only 14, to say, we need somebody to speak in favour of what the Prime Minister is suggesting. And of course, most people in Liverpool were against it, partly because they were naturally against most things, but also because Liverpool's on the wrong side of the country to Europe. Liverpool is on the American side of the country, if you're talking about trade. Would you lead the debate? Now, how on earth will I find out what the arguments are? And memorably, the teacher said, it's all in the Daily Telegraph. They're very pro this idea of us joining Europe. Then things change. And so I read the Daily Telegraph. I started reading it that day, and I've read it ever since, even as its attitudes have shifted. I did my best in the debate as one of the people speaking, and I think we got 3 votes. But it teaches you all sorts of lessons. One is, don't refuse a challenge, have a go, and don't mind if you don't win, because you learn from that. You learn from that. I joined the Liverpool Parliamentary Debating Society, and I became a mock Minister of Education. That was at the age of 17. That's a hell of an introduction to a world of practicality, of being able actually to do all this, and being able to stand up for yourself in public. So once I got to Oxford, there was a new world, and it was possible there to rub shoulders with people who just assumed, as indeed they still do, that they were going to run the country someday, and that their parents already ran the country. So one of my best friends, his father was in Macmillan's government. Somebody else, the president of the Oxford Union, was Quintin Hogg, whose father was not Quintin Hogg, was Douglas Hogg, and Quintin Hogg, his father, had been one of the challengers to Ted Heath in the 1960s. And they were all over the place. I've got pictures up here that have the Queen, Macmillan. Also, there's one that's got Michael Foot and Enoch Powell, who took part in a debate together. And I'm on that photo as well. And there was a kind of assumption that if you got this far, you can go further. Now, actually, to go further and to have a career in politics for a woman then was well nigh impossible. And what I did was I didn't get involved in women's organizations. And I've actually never been a feminist. And that's partly because feminism, when I was a young person, was really quite quite niche, quite narrow in its views. But what I was able to do was think how the boys, how the male students would do it, and do it much in the same way, and take on board that, yeah, you know, it's probably going to take a lot longer. But nonetheless, by the time I finished university in 1969, by 1975, I'm on Birmingham City Council with a husband and a baby tucked under one arm. And by 1983, I progressed far enough to be asked to stand for Parliament. How much of that was down to Jewish background, and how much of that was a positive, and how much of that was a difficulty in any ways? A hell of a lot of it is I'm Jewish, I'm in the old Ashkenazi tradition. We talk, we argue, we debate, we get very heated, we use words, we enjoy an argument. I love having an argument. When I'm on something daft like GB News or whatever, everything's firing, all the cylinders are firing, and I love doing that. I love calling somebody an idiot, but I'd much prefer to prove that that person is an idiot by bringing up some facts, or doing it in some way that can't be countermanded. So that's being Jewish as much as anything. And it also, I think, respect for scholarship. You know, my grandparents arrived in the UK as kids and met and married in Liverpool and reared 8 children. My grandfather said several things that were very significant. One was, we speak only English at home. My mum used to say that was so that he and my Bobby could have an argument together in Yiddish and they wouldn't understand. But actually what he was saying was that education mattered and that doing well in school mattered. He sent the 3 oldest boys out to be apprenticed as butchers because he said, the butcher is the last to starve. And once their wages are coming in, and there were 3 or 4 different wages coming in, the younger generation then could stay at school. My mum was right in the middle. She was able to stay on after 11, but had to leave school at 14 when the last child, my Auntie Zena, was born. But Zena and 2 of the others were able to go to university. And my Uncle Jack actually went to Cambridge and became headmaster of Avigdor School in London, Jack Crystal, quite a well-known headmaster many years ago, long since passed away. My Auntie Ashki was a woman student who graduated from Liverpool University, again, you know, 1940s, very unusual. And my Auntie Zena became a deputy head teacher. So when I come along, education's fine. That's what you do. That's how you progress. That's how you get on in life, especially as a girl. And I'm sure I got that from the family background, the family history. I didn't meet much anti-Semitism, though I think it was around. I was told on one occasion when I needed the September dates off for the High Holy Days that I had a rather inconvenient religion. And I remember looking at the teacher that said that to me and thinking, you know, you're an idiot, but I'm not going to tell you. You'll find out sooner or later. At university, I didn't have any problems whatsoever. Being a woman was the odd thing. Being a woman, being a Scouser, being lippy, that was always the odd thing, as it was once I got to Parliament. In 1983, when I was elected, it was Margaret Thatcher's 2nd term. And the fact that she got elected again with a huge majority was a revolution. And of course, she went on in 1987 to do it again with an equally large majority. I think it was 101 or something. And what was strange was partly that there were only 23 women in the House of Commons, and so 656 men. And you know, to hear some of the women MPs talk to Gay, you'd think we were fighting the blokes all off. I don't think we were, or at least I wasn't. Maybe I just looked a bit like I'd disable somebody who tried. I don't know. You grow up in Liverpool, you acquire all sorts of skills that perhaps you don't acquire in Maidenhead. But I didn't have that much in the way of problems. The difficulties always were that there were so few women there, and that you had to decide, are you going to speak for women or are you going to speak for your constituency? How do you handle it? In some ways that was decided for me, because I was selected by a mining constituency, and we found ourselves very quickly thrust into the miners' strike. You know, when I went to the interview, the question was, what does thou know about coal mining, Mrs. Currie? And the answer was, a lot, but you'll teach me, won't you? And in fact, the next question was, what does thou know about farming? And same answer. So you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to say, I don't know, but I will find out, I will learn. That's what I'm happy to do. So the mining strike was an education in all sorts of things. An education in how important it is to have a government which, once set on a particular direction, needs to stick with it. And that in itself builds trust, and it builds understanding and knowledge. The miners in South Derbyshire took a vote, which Arthur Scargill didn't allow most of his members, and they voted to stay at work. And that took courage, astonishing courage. On the first day of the strike, we had pickets 5 deep in South Derbyshire, which, believe me, is in the middle of nowhere. And there was a lot of fear, a lot of fear of intimidation, and a lot of anger about intimidation, and a lot of determination that people were actually going to, they were going to withstand this. We're not putting up with that. In fact, I remember the secretary of the miners' union, the local branch secretary, who I used to sit down and have a beer with occasionally, saying to me, you know, I said to him, how come people voted to not go on strike? And he said, it's bloody Yorkshire, isn't it? We're Derbyshire. I said, oh, come on. And he said, yeah, well, we hear all this from Scargill about rolling back tides of Thatcherism. He said, people around here voted for tides of Thatcherism, Edwina, that's why you're here. And I had an 8,000 majority. And then he looked thoughtful and he said, we're digging dirt down there and it's dangerous. Your job is to find us something else to do. I'm in my early 30s, married with 2 small kids. I've got an economics degree. How in God's name am I supposed to get an entire community something else to do? But we did. And I was able to encourage and help Toyota to come to this country. And they were making inquiries in 1989, just the pits were closing. And by 1992, they had a factory up and running. And 30 years later, they're still here and they are manufacturing now hybrid cars, and they intend to have an entirely electric cars. So again, it was a very useful lesson that, you know, when you get to Parliament, you don't automatically acquire extra brains. But if you're open to new experiences, and if you listen to the people who are there to teach you from their own life experiences, then you can think perhaps a little more broadly than they, because you've traveled more, you've read more, you've had an education, and you can help them to a better life. And that really, in the end, is what you should be in politics to do. It's not about you, it's about them all the time. I got involved in other things. I was invited to join Margaret's government and Department of Health. I was on the first AIDS, HIV working party, which put out all those "don't die of ignorance" adverts and leaflets. So I got quite a lot of experience of being a government during a pandemic, and scary business it was. I also got involved in women's health, because nobody had ever done women's health, ever. Women didn't talk about things, and they were dying unnecessarily of horrible things like uterine and cervical cancer, which cause such suffering, breast cancer. And I was advised that if we got some proper detection systems going, like mammograms, like they were using in Sweden, or the smear tests that they were using in Finland and a couple of other countries, if we could do that nationwide and persuade people to respond to the invitations, then we might actually start saving lives in years to come. So we got cracking on that, and I adopted that with enthusiasm, and I became well known for that. I tried to stop people smoking. I tried to encourage them to eat healthy diets, do something about heart disease and lung cancer and all that kind of thing. And as you know, I got involved out of the blue in a campaign on food safety, and that was in eggs. The eggs you eat now are safe because I made a fuss about it a very long time ago. That was back in December 1988. And I was disgusted when I was told I had to shut up about it. And eventually I resigned, went off and wrote lots of books and all the other things that Ros has so ably described. I got involved in politics again, just to bring the story up to date, this time last year. Local elections had been postponed. That's in where I live, that's county council elections. And there happened to be a vacancy in the ward where I live. And so I thought, right, I'll have a go. It was a Labour held seat. The person who held the seat was the former Labour MP who had lost in December 19, fairly complicated. Anyway, somebody of some stature. And so she was standing again. So I stood against her. To my delight, I increased our vote from 1,048 to 1,878, which should have been enough. But she turned out to be a true politician, and she brought in help from Manchester and Salford, and they absolutely plastered the place with posters and leaflets. They pushed the turnout to 55%. Any of you that have been involved in local government will know 55% is astonishing for a local election. And she won it, she held it. So at that point, I thought maybe Hashem was saying to me, don't do this. You've had your go, let other people do it. And so when I've been asked if I'd like to have another go, the answer is no, somebody else's turn now. But Ros, that brings us just about up to date. You've mentioned all the TV stuff that I've done. If you want to follow what I get up to, if you look at Twitter, you'll see some of my views. The lady you saw walking up the stairs behind me is new family. We have a family from Ukraine staying here now. Very nice family. My Poltava Bobby is saying to me, good, Edwina, good. And I'm glad we're doing that. It's turning out to be quite an experience. So there you go. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. That's really wonderful. Wonderful what you're doing, and having a family staying with you. That's fantastic. Well done. Before I ask you anything, let me take you off spotlight so that you can see everybody. Does anybody have any questions for Edwina?
Who would like to go first? Yes.
Gwendolyn.
Hello, good afternoon. Lovely to hear you and lovely to see you. Can you tell me, is it in 1988 when you brought up the salmonella? And of course, you're absolutely right. And the press stopped you, told you to shut up. Would you have stood for leader of the Conservative Party if it hadn't been for that?
Oh my goodness. I mean, that's one of those impossible answers. When you're in politics, you learn never to answer hypothetical questions.
Yes.
But bear this in mind, that to be leader of a party in government, it really helps to have been Secretary of State in the cabinet. And Margaret Thatcher didn't actually have any women from the Commons in her cabinet in 11 years in office. I mean, she was one of our longest serving prime ministers for 200 years. And she was the only woman in the cabinet. The only other person she had for 1 year was Janet Young, who she made leader of the House of Lords. So Janet wasn't ever stood for election. So that meant it was very hard for another woman to even contemplate going for one of the top jobs. But also it doesn't half help if you've got a safe seat. And one thing I was conscious of was that South Derbyshire, in Derbyshire, there's only one safe seat. And that's the one next door, which used to be called West Derbyshire, now called Derbyshire Dales. But the others tend to go whichever way the national vote goes. So You know, if we're going to lose our seats, we're going to lose the government, which is a roundabout way of saying I'd moved on, and I'm more than happy to see the resolution of eggs and to earn a living in a different way, particularly because that meant that I didn't get involved in any of that expenses scandal. You know, by the time we got to that date, every penny I was spending, I'd earned, and I could show that I'd earned it. Let me just finish off the egg story, if you like, because for a long time, the farming industry was in denial, and they kept saying it's all rubbish. It's just dirty kitchens and dirty housewives, which had me absolutely apoplectic, as you can imagine. And then 10 years later, so we're talking about 1998, the egg industry actually approached me and said, you were right. I said, I wish you'd said that then. No recriminations. You were right. And we want to get this industry back on its feet. Can you help us? So I said, well, I'm not a biological expert or anything like that, but when you can tell me that there are no more contaminated eggs, I'll tell everybody, and I won't take a penny of money from you ever to say so, but I'll work with you. And they came back eventually in the spring of 2004. So it took them more than 5 years because it was difficult. You know, hen houses they're not clean places. It dawned on them they had to produce food in as clean an atmosphere as you would if you were baking biscuits or making yogurt or something like that. Once they got their heads around that and constant testing, then they were able to show that British eggs produced under the Lion brand, which they revived for this purpose, were safe. And quite recently, last year, the various NHS food health safety people said that they're now so safe that pregnant women can eat eggs, and people with immunocompromised systems and so on. And that's moi. I did that.
Yes, I was very, very sorry for you at the time. I was quite indignant on your behalf, really was. They were very, very wrong to criticise you, and you were absolutely right. And I applaud you for that, because you've changed the eggs, and we now eat healthy eggs thanks to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwendolyn. Vera.
First of all, I've already said I'm amazed how young you look. That's the compliment. And secondly, do any of your 7 children feel in any way Jewish?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. Of the various children, I mean, they're all adults. You know, the youngest is about to have her, let me just remember, 45th birthday. That's my daughter, Susie. And Susie actually has very strong religious feelings, but she's an evangelical, and she knows the Bible, in English at least, better than I do. I got classical Hebrew O-level. How about that, eh? But no, I don't think so. Most of I have 2 daughters, and my husband, John, my second husband, John, had 4 sons. He had 2 sons of his own and 2 stepsons. And his sons are all in their 50s and touching 60 now. And so, no, they were not brought up Jewish at all. But what I think we have is a lot of respect. Number 2 son, Rob, his wife came from a very big Christian family in Barnsley in Yorkshire. And again, her father, Robert, Reverend Robert Mace, who was very well known in Yorkshire, was a man who attracted enormous respect. He was a scholar. He was a very lovely man. And he and I used to talk about things and how interpretations change. So no, Jonathan Sachs was right. Will we have Jewish grandchildren? No.
And tell me, do you feel that it was the ultra-Orthodox attitudes of your parents that made you begin to feel that you didn't want to stay Jewish?
Well, they weren't ultra-Orthodox as we understand it. They were standard Ashkenazi. My great-grandparents I think we're very pious, very frum. My great-grandfather, that's my mother's father, ran the mikveh in Liverpool until the 1920s.
Right.
So, you know, we are talking, I think he was the one that died in the Spanish flu. So he died, I think, 1919, something like that. And they were very distinguished people. And there's a family photograph in 1906 of one of my grandfather's sisters getting married. And the whole family are there, all in their finery. And my great-grandmother is in a wig and so on. And they were obviously very, very religious and widely respected. You can tell from the way they hold themselves that they are. They're not in any way apologizing for who they are. They are known in the community in an important way. And religion was very important to my grandparents and to many of my cousins. They, especially in London, some of you may know Andrew and Alison Mazin are my cousins. They find a lot of joy and a lot of comfort from their membership of the shuls and so on. What happened with me was I was a bit more adventurous. My family made it quite clear that if I married out, then I was out. And I did, and I was. And at that point, you make choices. You think, all right, it's very sad. We'll make it up later. We'll make it up later. We never did make it up with my dad because he died 4 years later. He never saw any of his grandchildren. And that's a source of great sadness. But my mum lived on another 29 years as a widow, and we became very close. And
thank you. That's interesting.
That was lovely. So, you know, never say never.
Thank you for answering all my questions.
Thank you, Vera. Who else would like to ask a question? Gwendolyn again.
Yes. Well, as a proof of your identity with the Jewish people, I wonder if I could ask you, where would you like to be buried? Will you be buried in a Jewish cemetery? I just want to ask you that, if you don't mind.
I would like to go out with a bang. I'm serious. I would like to, I know that this can be done because it was done to somebody that we knew when we lived in Surrey. And I just love the idea that money will be set aside and that the executors will have to find it for a big party where everyone's going to be invited and have a lovely time. And it will finish as darkness falls with a fireworks display. And the biggest bang of all is going to have my ashes in it. That's where I'm going.
So you're going to be cremated?
I think so. I do go and visit my mum's grave from time to time.
Yes.
She's buried in Liverpool. I've tipped the sexton there and said to him, I'll be back from time to time. I want you to keep this clean. Here's some money. He has no idea when I'm coming back. So whenever there's another Jewish Levaya, I think he cleans it up a bit. But I hope that some bits of me remain in people's hearts. And if not, I'll be all over the roses.
Oh, I thought maybe you would want to be buried next to your husband. That's all I thought.
Well, my first husband is still alive. And remarried many, many years ago. My second husband was cremated. He died of cancer 18 months ago, right in the middle of COVID. Awful, absolutely awful. We were able to nurse him at home, which was a blessing. And we then, because we were going into lockdown 3 days later, we had the funeral service very quickly. We didn't have a death certificate. We didn't have a cremation certificate or anything. So weeks later, when the various certificates came, we had a second service and he was cremated. And I had said to his sons, do you want the ashes? If you don't want the ashes, then we won't have the ashes. Or I might have some. And as I say, put them on the roses. Because he had no beliefs of that kind at all. And the boys said, no, they wanted some. So a large plastic bag with, oh my goodness, I mean, it's so disrespectful in a way. Sat on the sofa for over a year until COVID finished and one of the boys came and collected. I think the idea is that one of them will scatter ashes in Scotland where he lives, one will scatter them in Bermuda where he lives, and one will scatter them round the Old Bailey where my husband, who was a senior Met detective, spent a great deal of time nailing the bad guys. And I said to Richard, the one who wants to do that, I said, you won't get permission to do this. And he said, who's going to ask for permission? So there you go.
He sounds like a chip off the old block, Edwina.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gwendolyn. We have a question in the chat, which is, do you think the Conservative Party has changed a lot since the Margaret Thatcher days?
Yes and no. The principles behind the party, which is of freedom of choice and believing that the states, a government doesn't have all the answers, I think those feelings are still intact. And the contrast always is not with so much the Lib Dems, but it's with the socialism, with the Labour Party, which I think I can characterise as thinking actually government should do more and government will have the right answers. Most Conservatives, most Tories think now governments are no better at having the answers than anybody else, in which case we might as well keep our taxes and make the choices and spend our money ourselves. It tends to be a more business-friendly party, and I think particularly since Margaret Thatcher's day. What has happened is I think the party is a lot more tolerant now. You know, in Margaret's day, it didn't do to be gay. It didn't do to be black, as I mentioned. It really didn't do to be a woman. And she made no effort whatever to counteract any of that. The changes in that respect came when David Cameron became leader of the party. I would have wished that they had come when Michael Howard was leader of the party, but they didn't. And that, I think, was not really his forte. And I remember when we were debating gay rights at some point in the House of Commons quite late on. And I got involved in that because I hate discrimination of all kinds. I think all discrimination diminishes us. And proposed some changes. And Michael was Home Secretary at that point, and he spoke against them. And I was so angry, I intervened on him and I said, you know, if previous incumbents in this house had spoken in the same way about Jews or about women, neither he nor I would be here. I was so angry with him, but he didn't accept the argument. But once David Cameron came along, I think David really addressed the issues of trying to choose your voters. You can't do that. You have to look at the country and think about how your message resonates with all the voters. That's moved on in a way that Margaret herself would now recognise. I'm living in a red wall seat. This has been a Labour seat in previous years, and it changes hands. We are surrounded a little bit further north in the Stockport, Manchester areas by a lot of Labour seats, and of course Manchester City Council and Andy Burnham are the great strength there. And in seats like this, what Boris gets up to is he's listening hard to what people want. And you may not like it. And I'm sure Islington and Hampstead are horrified, but it resonates with voters in this part of the world. And that's how I think politics is playing out at the moment. We've lived through extraordinary times. I mean, we've had Brexit, and then we've had the pandemic, and now we've got the war in Ukraine. Oh my goodness. It's quite extraordinary. Applying your principles in those circumstances is a little difficult, but I think, as Margaret Thatcher would say, it's even more important to stick to our principles in difficult times.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anyone else with questions? Colin?
Edwina, thank you for a very interesting speech. As a child of refugees, I've been very upset, particularly by seeing the scenes and reports from the train stations in Ukraine. And I'm full of admiration that you've taken in a family, which is absolutely marvelous. Could you tell us a little bit about the logistics involved in being able to do that? And on a completely different subject, completely different tack, on a political question, how do you feel the impasse in Northern Ireland over the protocol can ever be resolved? Thank you very much.
Well, I think the brief answer to the question about the impasse in Northern Ireland is with goodwill on both sides. And that's what it needs. And I have a slightly uncomfortable feeling that Boris, who is not the most saintly and trustworthy of characters, despite being leader of my party, that Boris is happy for Brexit to be an issue once again, because he knows that many people would prefer not to have Brexit, would prefer us to have much closer relationships with the EU, and that is a dividing line within the electorate. I'm not saying all the goodwill is on the European side either, but that's the way that you resolve that. Now, as for finding myself as babushka all over again, which always makes them giggle here. I think it means silly old lady in modern parlance, which is fine. I'm happy with that description. It happened almost by accident. When the invasion took place on February the 24th, I was as horrified as anybody else and found myself glued to the TV to see what was happening. And I had a phone call almost immediately from a lady called Natasha, who runs a local restaurant here in Whaley Bridge. And she was distraught because although I think she'd been telling everybody that she and her husband Alex were Portuguese, they weren't, they were Ukrainian, and they had come to the UK many years ago when in fact, you know, this is a sort of don't ask, don't tell environment. But she had come from Donetsk and she had stayed in touch with old school friends and so on. And some of them had had a very, very difficult time, managed to get away from Donetsk, which had been occupied, and come over to the west of the country. And now, you know, they're being bombarded again. And she said, can I help? Could I help to get visas? Sure, see what I can do. Do you want me to sponsor somebody? At that time, it wasn't clear what sponsor meant. You know, just maybe saying, yeah, we're okay, we can make sure they're looked after here and so on. Send them some money if necessary. And the next thing I know, she's got a family that were old school friends who have moved from Donetsk to Odessa 6 years ago, and have had to move from Odessa, and they've left immediately and they've gone into Moldova. And they're sitting in a grim little flat they've rented, mum and two kids, two boys. Dad has stayed behind, obviously. Her mother has refused to leave, and her father has refused to leave, and he's still in Donetsk. So I said, well, yes, where are they going to stay? And she said, well, I don't know if they're coming to England. You know, they can go to Austria, they can go to Germany, they can go to Spain. The first flights are leaving for Portugal. They probably won't come to England. But they can't stay with me, she said, because her house is full. I said, well, I've got 2 spare bedrooms, spare bathroom. If they can put up with me, they're welcome to stay here. And that's what happened. You have to sign up for 6 months. But, you know, in some ways, if I'm being totally honest, that helps to fill the gap that's created by having lost my husband. And those of you widows will recognize that. And it's turning out to be a really interesting, worthwhile thing to do. People have said to me, oh, you found it easy, you were able to do it quickly because of who you are. And that's probably true. On the other hand, if you've been in politics, you know where the brick wall is that you don't bang your head against. So, for example, getting the kids into school, I phoned several schools, do you have spare places? And it wasn't worth applying to the one that didn't. Even though they'd been told that they can lift the cap on school places. They're not doing it. The message hasn't got through to them yet. And for the kids from Ukraine, it doesn't matter whether the school's got a forceful academic record or not. What matters is, do they look after the kids? And so the schools we put down did have vacancies. We'd already had conversations. One of the schools had a Russian speaker, a woman with a degree in Russian. And all sorts of people come forward who have been really, really helpful. You become very good at filling in forms online. There is a monstrous industry of bureaucracy out there. When you've done the same stuff 12 times, and you know you got it right 12 times, and you're screaming at the screen, you realize why Boris is probably right to say, can we get rid of some of those civil servants? It's designed, the whole system, whether you're applying for visas, for universal credit, whatever you're applying for, is designed to deter. And that's wrong. That seems to me wrong in principle. What I hope is going to come out of this is we might actually treat some of the other refugees a little bit better. People who have genuinely come to the country as refugees have often come, as we know as Jewish people, they've come with remarkable skills. And to treat them with suspicion is not in the country's interest. To ensure, on the other hand, that those skills are recognised, that they can learn English quickly and they can settle down, means that they could rapidly become an asset to the UK, especially if they're in circumstances where they're not going to go home. I think my Ukrainian family will go home, and I'm hoping that they'll go home having had a good experience here.
Thank you very much. Just one small question and then I'll go away. Have they heard from the father of the family? How is he? Do they?
They're all in touch every day. They're all in touch. It's a little more difficult to be in touch with Donetsk, where there's pretty active fighting going on there. But no, Hannah walks around in the garden talking morning, noon and night to mum, to friends, to husband. And yeah, that's very, very reassuring. The last 82 days, 83 days, as the news improves from Ukraine, I think she's relaxing a little bit, but none of us will be satisfied until the Russians are chased out of Ukraine and Putin is chased out of office, which we hope will happen before too long.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Okay, Edwina, are you still okay for another couple of questions? Okay, so we've got another couple in the chat. The first one is, do you have any regrets?
Oh, loads. You don't have any regrets. You haven't tried anything. You haven't failed at anything. You haven't loved. Oh yes, lots and lots. I think the big ones are things like not having convinced my ministerial colleagues that I was right on the food safety issue, so that nobody rallied round. Ah, that's when you find your friends. But also things like, I wish my first marriage had gone better. We're coming up to what would have been our 50th anniversary, and it's sad that that didn't happen. We had wonderful kids, but sometimes things fall apart. I'm so sad that my dad didn't live long enough, as long as my mum, for me to be able to talk through with him, his immediate no. I mean, we found out many years later, my brother and I are very close. My mum passed away in 2004. My brother and I are very close, and we've often talked about this. And he gets across that Dad was very strict with us, but behind the scenes, he liked his bacon butties, and there was an element of, what about this? And I figured out, I think I'm more forgiving. I figured out that Dad's view was, don't disgrace us in public. What you do in private is your own life, but what you do in public affects everybody. And I get that. Having had a public life, I get that. On the other hand, it's very easy to think these days that there's an element of trying to face both ways. And I would have enjoyed debating this with him when he got into his 80s. And I hope he would have lived long enough to met my second husband. When my mum met my second husband and I said to Mum, "You're coming to this wedding," she looked at John with big dark eyes and his dark hair. She said, "I'm sure you've got Jewish blood." And I'm sure she was right. "I'm coming to this one." And she did.
Wonderful. Did your brother marry a Jewish girl?
Yes, the first time. And it lasted about 8 years. And they had beautiful house in Liverpool and everything going for them. And I think they were just both, it didn't suit them. It didn't take them anywhere. And that marriage broke up, and he went around the world a bit, and then he met a lovely woman who became his wife, and they were together for 30 years and had 2 lovely daughters, now grown up. Liverpool was a mess in those days. It had been flattened in the war. The community was very traumatized. It was long afterwards that I realized how subdued everything was. And it was a kind of PTSD, I suppose. If you wanted to make something of yourself, you were going to have to leave. And you left physically and metaphorically. And both my brother and I did.
Yeah. Is your brother close to you now, distance-wise?
My brother is in Wimbledon.
Okay.
But we see each other. I get down to London about once every 5-6 weeks, and I keep in touch. I see my brother. I see my cousin, Ruth Bernstein. I see my dear friend, Sheila Shear, who's coming up to her 90th birthday. And I don't keep in touch with them out of duty. I do this because I love them and they're great fun. We go to the theatre together. We go out and eat. We argue. We talk. We're a Jewish family.
Yeah, wonderful. Can I just ask you one more light-hearted question about the jungle? Is it as we see it on the TV, or is it staged?
Oh, it's as you see it on TV. It's for real. And when it's live, it's live. A lot of what you see, obviously, in a program that lasts an hour and a half has been filmed over recent days. And they will edit a lot of the film to create a narrative. And if you've got any sense and you've thought about it, you create your own narrative. I mean, for example, in normal times, perhaps not during the pandemic and during lockdown when things wanted to be more positive, but in normal times, a program like that thrives on conflict. And if you know there's going to be conflict, then what you try and do is you're listening to the arguments and debates and so on, and you pick your moment to disagree. And I listened and I heard, we had an American woman on called Kendra, who had been in the equivalent of the Big Brother house, the Playboy house, for years. She was well known, in quite tacky stuff. Very, very beautiful young woman. And she kept talking about being a mother, and she'd had a baby only 6 months earlier, and she'd left the baby behind. So I'm thinking, yes, there's a bit of empty virtuous signaling going on here. And she used to lecture all of us. And on one occasion, she stood up on a tree stump and she said, "You should never live your lives for other people." I said, "Pardon?" "You should never live your lives for other people." And I think what she meant was, you shouldn't let other people tell you what to do, which I would have been more sympathetic with. But that's not how she put it. You should never live your life for other people. And I said, well, I don't agree. Lots of people live their lives for other people. Nurses do. My husband was a police officer, arresting bad guys with arms. He would have given his life for other people. And she looked at me and she directed a stream of foul abuse in my direction. And I looked at her and I said, "Oh, I've been shouted at by the likes of Margaret Thatcher, Kendra. That doesn't work." And I got more of it. And in my head, I'm going, thank you, God. This is my row. This is my row. And yeah, it went viral.
Yeah,
we were the top trending tweet worldwide 6 nights on the road.
Yeah, you were amazing, very memorable.
So it is as you see it.
Yeah.
ITV are very conscious that if anything was done that cheats, they would lose credibility immediately. They had this argument with Carl Fogarty, who was convinced that I had not beaten him in one of the trials, and I had beaten him. And they ran the film past to show him when his concentration failed and he took his hand off the button, whatever it was. And they said to him, with me standing there quietly thinking, I beat him, I beat him, I beat him. I did beat him, of course I beat him. They said, it's not worth our while. You know, this program costs millions to put on. It's not worth our while to lose credibility. And he went on to win the whole show. So that was all right. Justice was done.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much. It is 3 o'clock. I don't know how you are for time. We can call it a day now. There are more questions, but I think they're going to keep coming. So it's really up to you.
Yeah, let's do it till about 1/4 past, and then
Okay. All right. So the next question is, hold on one second. Okay. So do you think William Hague could be persuaded to run for Neil Parish's Devon seat so that he could make a run for the Tory leadership again? He has the integrity that the Tory party desperately needs.
Well, he has, I would agree with that comment, but he's a member of the House of Lords now. And I think he found the whole experience of being leader of the party at a very difficult time, very, very bruising. And what you lose when you are in Parliament, and particularly in that very high profile role, is you lose any semblance of a personal or private life. And what you relish when you are no longer in Parliament is that you do have a private life and you can do and say what you feel is right. And you have more freedom and more control over your time. I can't see him doing what's been suggested. Totnes will choose somebody else, and it will be for the Totnes people to decide who they want, both as their candidate and to fight it and hopefully to win it. I don't envy whoever stands and whoever wins, because even if it goes the other way, there'll be a general election in a couple of years. The general election has to happen by December 2024. Nobody is going to want to fight a general election in the depths of the winter and the cold like we did last time. So my guess is that the election will be in the summer of 2024, possibly June or thereabouts, in which case whoever is in could have only 2 years to be in before they're out again. That's not great.
Thank you. Okay, next question. What needs to change in the British political system to encourage the younger generation to engage with politics?
Well, we've been asking that for about 50 years. The younger generation are engaged. I'm very impressed at, on Twitter, you come across all sorts of people. I'm very impressed at the young generation that's come through college recently, that gets it, that what really matters is how the country is run, and that just being in the media or an influencer, it doesn't help the country to run. I was doing a debate on the Dan Wootton show last night with GB News, where we were talking about Margaret Thatcher's statue, which in itself is a fairly trivial issue. But there was a young woman on who was a campaigner and very anti, and she wanted more statues of human rights campaigners. And I said, yeah, but all they do is make the noise. It's actually the politicians who make the changes, who bring legislation through Parliament, who do the convincing of the public to change and to accept change. And their role should not be diminished. It's not less important than campaign, it's more important. And there's a lot of young people that understand that now. People who've had a tough time at uni, have been paying their full uni fees and haven't seen a lecturer since they started. People who've realized that the world has changed and the kind of job that they were expecting to do has vanished, but that other jobs have become available. We've seen extremely rapid change concentrated into a short space of time over the last couple of years. And young people get it. I think they're an amazing generation. And, you know, I hope they're going to pay their taxes, because that's what's helping to pay for my pension.
Yeah, my daughter's doing medicine and she's going to come out with a debt of about 100,000 by the end of her studies. So, yeah.
I would like, when it comes to students, I would like us to have a scholarship system again.
Yeah.
It's been talked about, but, you know, all my education was free. I had scholarship to go to school. I had, which helped to pay for school uniform and stuff. I had scholarship to go to Oxford. I had a maintenance grant. Didn't have much money, believe me, but just enough to scrape through and to come out at the other end with, I think I had 10 quid in the bank. I asked my dad for a loan and he said, no, you're on your own now. You know, but the idea of kids having to, especially for shortage professions where we're desperately trying to train more people up, having to fork it all out. I think that's wrong. Nurses, of course, still get bursaries. There was talk about nursing bursaries vanishing, and they got reinstated very quickly during the pandemic.
And so they should. Okay, so we have a comment here that this lady says, I think you have courage to come onto a talk where you could have objecting views on religion. So it's a comment. I don't know if you want to answer anything.
Well, I've always, I treat other people's views where they deserve them with respect. That's, you know, not everybody is in that category, but you don't have to treat my views with respect, and you certainly don't have to copy what I do or recommend anything I do to your family. We are blessed. Oh my God, when you look at Ukraine or Russia, we are blessed with living in a free country where choice actually matters. And all I would ask is that we look after each other and do our best to make life as good as possible for each other.
Most definitely. Okay, I think this is our last question, which is, what did you take away with you at the end of the TV program Pilgrimage?
A lot of honey. At one stage, it was lovely. We filmed that in September 2019. And it was, for those who didn't see it, it was the Sultan's Trail, which went, the Sultan had gone from, Sultan Mehmed the Magnificent had gone from Istanbul to try and conquer Christian Europe. And he'd gone through Turkey, obviously Bulgaria, through what is now Serbia. And then he had got to the gates of Vienna, where and he'd done it 3 times, and his army was destroyed. And he actually died in what is now modern day Hungary. And it had been set up as a pilgrimage trail with people going on from Istanbul, then down through to Jerusalem. And we did meet some pilgrims who'd actually started from Rome and were heading to Jerusalem. We expected to be there by the Easter of the following year. And they arrived just as lockdown happened, no doubt. And it was fascinating. What did I take away from it? Well, the honey arrived because at one point it was Rosh Hashanah. And we were all encouraged to express our different religious identities. And I said, well, it's Rosh Hashanah. We should have honey. We should have apple. We should, as the sun is going down, wish everybody a fruitful year and a sweet year. So we went to a market and we bought apples. And it was Bulgaria. They had honeycombs as big as cartwheels, 30 quid. So we bought a whole lot, a whole one, and shared it out with everybody. Have some honey, have some sticky, I was honey in my hair everywhere. And I managed to get one small plastic box, and I put some of the honey and the honeycomb in that, and I brought that home. So that was lovely. It was a nice memory. It was nicely filmed as well. What else did I bring home? Friendship with wonderful people like Fatima Whitbread, who's whose original father, she was adopted by the Whitbreads, but her father was Turkish. And I know for her, it was quite a journey. And Amal Latif, who's lovely, lives up in Leeds, went blind with retinitis pigmentosa, has been to my house, come to one of my parties, absolutely super guy, and one or two of the others as well. If all you bring from your journey of life is friendship, you're doing pretty well, I reckon, and a few good memories too to go with them.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. Edwina, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have you on today. I wish you all the very best and well done for what you're doing with your Ukrainian family. And everybody is clapping, giving you a huge round of applause here. And really, honestly, we could not be more delighted that you came on today. So thank you really so much.
My pleasure. Look after yourselves. Stay well.
You too. God bless.
Thank you. Bye.